The stagecoach rattled into Prescott, Arizona territory on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, and Sarah Mae Thompson pressed her hand against her mouth as she peered through the dusty window at the rough frontier town that would become her new home. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, leaving behind the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her since childhood, hoping that in this wild and untamed place she might finally disappear into obscurity. The town sprawled before her like a collection of weathered wooden boxes scattered across the high desert landscape, with the San Francisco peaks visible in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow even in summer. Prescott sat at over 5,000 feet elevation, making the July heat more bearable than the lower desert regions, though the sun still beat down with relentless intensity on the dirt streets below. Sarah was 22 years old, slender and small-boned, with thick chestnut hair she kept pinned severely back from her face and large hazel eyes that seemed too big for her delicate features. She wore a modest traveling dress of dark blue cotton, practical but well-made, showing her middle-class upbringing. Her hands were small and graceful, accustomed to needlework and household tasks rather than hard labor. Everything about her appearance spoke of gentility and careful breeding, except for the one feature that had defined her entire existence. Her teeth grew in crooked and overlapping, creating an asymmetrical smile that had been the source of endless shame since she was old enough to understand that she looked different from other children. In Philadelphia, her mother had constantly reminded her to keep her lips pressed together, to never laugh too loudly, to cultivate an air of mysterious reserve that might distract from her imperfection. Her father, a shipping merchant who had died 3 years earlier, had consulted with doctors about possible corrections. But in 1875, such procedures were primitive, painful, and offered no guarantees. Sarah had learned to live behind a mask of careful composure, always aware of her mouth, always conscious of how others might perceive her. She had watched her younger sister marry well at 19, had endured the barely concealed relief in her mother's voice when a distant cousin in Arizona territory had written, offering Sarah a position as schoolteacher in the growing town of Prescott. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Wells Fargo office, and Sarah gathered her small carpet bag, leaving her trunk to be retrieved later. She stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, her boots raising small clouds of dust, and immediately felt the stares of passers-by. Prescott was rough, but surprisingly civilized for a frontier town, serving as the territorial capital with a population approaching 2,000 souls. The streets were wide and lined with businesses, mercantiles, saloons, a hotel, a bank, and various other establishments that served the mining operations and ranches in the surrounding country. Sarah kept her head down and her hand near her mouth as she walked toward the address she had been given for her cousin Rebecca's home. She was acutely aware of her own awkwardness in this strange place, feeling exposed and vulnerable. The men she passed wore broad-brimmed hats and carried themselves with a rough confidence she had never encountered in Philadelphia. The women she saw looked hardy and practical, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their dresses simpler and more serviceable than the fashions back east. She had walked only 2 blocks when she realized she had taken a wrong turn. The street she was on led away from the residential area and toward what appeared to be a livery stable and corrals. Sarah stopped, uncertain, and pulled out the piece of paper with her cousin's address, trying to orient herself. The afternoon sun beat down on her dark dress, and she felt perspiration forming at her temples and the back of her neck. She had just decided to retrace her steps when she heard a commotion from the corral ahead. A large chestnut horse was rearing and bucking inside the wooden fence, and a man was trying to calm the animal with a steady voice and patient movements. Sarah knew she should turn back, that it was improper for her to stand watching, but something about the scene held her attention. The man was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on his head to reveal sun-bronzed features and dark hair. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost like a dance as he avoided the horse's hooves and gradually worked his way closer to the frightened animal. Several other men stood outside the corral watching, their postures tense. One of them called out, "Just rope him and tie him down, Cole. That Mustang is too wild to be worth the trouble." The man called Cole did not respond, keeping his attention focused entirely on the horse. He was speaking in low, soothing tones that Sarah could not quite make out from where she stood. Gradually, incredibly, the horse's movements became less frantic. Cole approached step by careful step, never making sudden movements, never showing fear or aggression. When he finally reached the horse's side and placed a hand on its neck, Sarah found she had been holding her breath. She let it out in a soft gasp, and the sound, small as it was, caught Cole's attention. He turned his head and looked directly at her, and Sarah's hand flew instinctively to cover her mouth. Even from a distance of 30 feet, his eyes seemed to see right through her careful defenses. They were a striking light brown, almost amber in the afternoon sun, set in a face that was more interesting than handsome, with strong bones and a mouth that looked accustomed to both hard work and genuine smiles. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, an unfamiliar sensation that was both alarming and inexplicably pleasant. Then one of the other men said something crude about strange women hanging around the corrals, and the spell was broken. Sarah's face flushed hot with embarrassment, and she turned quickly, walking as fast as she could back the way she had come, without actually running. She heard footsteps behind her, and a voice calling, "Ma'am, wait." But Sarah did not wait. She could not bear to have this stranger, whose competence and confidence had so impressed her, see her up close and judge her lacking. She turned the corner and nearly collided with a woman in a faded calico dress who was carrying a basket of washing. "Goodness, dear, where is the fire?" the woman asked kindly, steadying Sarah with a work-roughened hand. "I apologize," Sarah said, keeping her voice soft and her lips carefully positioned. "I seem to have lost my way. I am looking for the home of Mrs. Rebecca Thornton on Oak Street." The woman's face brightened with recognition. "Oh, you must be the cousin from back east. Rebecca has been talking about your arrival for weeks. You have gone a bit out of your way, dear. Oak Street is back toward the center of town, 3 blocks north of the Wells Fargo office. I am heading that direction myself. I will walk with you." Sarah felt relief wash over her. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, kept up a steady stream of friendly conversation that required only occasional murmurs of acknowledgement from Sarah. She spoke about the weather, the recent troubles with Apache raids in the more remote areas, the new minister who had arrived last month, and the various businesses in town. By the time they reached a neat white-painted house with a small garden in front, Sarah had learned a great deal about Prescott and its inhabitants. Rebecca Thornton came rushing out before Sarah could even knock, her round face beaming with welcome. She was Sarah's second cousin, 10 years older, and had married a territorial judge who had brought her west 5 years ago. "Sarah Mae, at last! I have been watching for the stage all day. Come in, come in. Thank you so much, Harriet, for bringing her. You must be exhausted, dear. The journey from Philadelphia is absolutely grueling. I remember when Thomas and I made the trip, I thought I would never sit comfortably again after all those hours in the stagecoach." The house was modest but comfortable, with real glass windows and wooden floors that showed Rebecca's determined efforts to maintain Eastern standards of gentility. Sarah was shown to a small bedroom at the back of the house that would be her own, a luxury she had not expected. The room contained a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small wardrobe, and a single chair by the window that looked out onto a yard where chickens pecked at the ground. "I know it is not what you were accustomed to," Rebecca said, misinterpreting Sarah's silence as disappointment. "But it is clean and private, and Thomas built that wardrobe himself. The schoolhouse is only a 10-minute walk from here, very convenient. You will start teaching after the harvest break, which gives you nearly a month to settle in and prepare your lessons." "It is perfect," Sarah said softly, and meant it. For the first time in her life, she would have her own space, her own domain, away from her mother's critical eye and the suffocating propriety of Philadelphia society. That evening, over a supper of chicken stew and fresh bread, Sarah met Judge Thomas Thornton, a dignified man in his early 40s with graying temples and a kind demeanor. He spoke enthusiastically about the future of Arizona Territory and the civilizing influence that education would bring to Prescott's children. Sarah listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and gradually relaxed in the warmth of their welcome. She did not mention her encounter at the livery stable, though the memory of those amber eyes stayed with her as she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town settling into darkness. Dogs barked in the distance, and somewhere a piano played in what was probably a saloon. The air that came through her open window was cool and dry, so different from Philadelphia's humid summer nights. Sarah touched her fingers to her mouth, tracing the contours of her crooked teeth behind her closed lips, and wondered if she would ever feel truly comfortable in her own skin. The next morning, Rebecca took Sarah on a tour of Prescott, introducing her to the various merchants and important townspeople. They visited the general store, where Sarah would purchase supplies for the schoolhouse, and the church, where Reverend Matthews welcomed her warmly and invited her to attend services on Sunday. They stopped at the dressmaker's shop, where Rebecca insisted on ordering Sarah 2 new dresses more suitable for the Arizona climate than her heavy eastern woolens. Throughout the morning, Sarah maintained her carefully cultivated reserve, speaking softly and infrequently, always conscious of keeping her imperfection hidden. She noticed that people in Prescott were more direct than their Philadelphia counterparts, quicker to ask personal questions and offer opinions, but also more genuinely friendly. By midday, her face ached from the effort of maintaining her careful expression. They were walking past the livery stable, the same one Sarah had encountered the previous day, when Rebecca said, "Oh, we should stop here. Thomas wants to arrange for a horse for you to use. It is too far to walk to some of the children's homes when you need to meet with parents, and you should have transportation available in case of emergency." Sarah's heart began to beat faster, but she could hardly object without explaining why. They entered the stable yard, where the smell of hay and horses was thick in the warm air. A grizzled older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornton," he said, nodding respectfully. "What can I do for you today?" "Good morning, Mr. Fletcher. This is my cousin, Sarah Thompson, who will be teaching at the school. Judge Thornton sent word that we would like to arrange for a gentle horse she can use, something reliable and not too spirited." "Mr.?" Fletcher looked Sarah over with an appraising eye that held no judgment, merely professional assessment. "I have just the animal, bought her last month from a widow who was moving back east. Sweet-tempered mare, about 7 years old, perfect for a lady who wants dependable transportation. She is in the back corral. Let me fetch Cole to bring her around. He has been working with her." Before Sarah could think of any excuse to leave, Mr. Fletcher had called out, and the man from yesterday emerged from the barn. In the clear morning light, Sarah could see him more distinctly. He was indeed tall, probably just over 6 feet, with a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard physical work. His face was weathered but young, probably 25 or 26 years old, with strong features and those remarkable amber eyes that had stayed in her memory. He wore working clothes, denim trousers, and a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. When his eyes met Sarah's, she saw recognition flicker across his face, followed by a slow smile that transformed his features from merely interesting to genuinely attractive. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas or the Southern Territories. "Cole, this is Mrs. Thornton and her cousin, Miss Thompson. The judge wants to arrange a horse for Miss Thompson. I told them about the bay mare. Rosie," Cole said, nodding. "She would be perfect. I will bring her around." He disappeared into the barn and returned a few minutes later, leading a pretty bay mare with a white star on her forehead and gentle dark eyes. The horse moved calmly beside him, clearly comfortable with his presence. Cole brought her directly to Sarah, stopping a respectful few feet away. "This is Rosie," he said, addressing Sarah directly. "She is as gentle as they come, good on trails, does not spook easily. She likes carrots and apples, and she appreciates a kind word now and then." Sarah kept her hand near her mouth and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The horse was beautiful, and something about Cole's gentle manner with the animal touched her deeply. "Would you like to pet her?" Cole asked, and there was something in his tone that was encouraging rather than condescending. "She is very friendly." Sarah hesitated, then slowly reached out her free hand toward Rosie's nose. The mare nickered softly and pressed into Sarah's palm, her breath warm and slightly sweet. Despite herself, Sarah felt a smile beginning to form, and she caught it quickly, pressing her lips together and glancing away. But she was not quick enough. Cole had seen the beginning of that smile, and he said, his voice warm and genuine, "You should smile more often. It is beautiful." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For a moment she could not breathe, could not think. Everyone around her had spent her entire life telling her to smile less, to hide, to be careful. And here was this stranger, this cowboy who knew nothing about her, telling her the exact opposite. She felt tears prick at her eyes, and she turned away abruptly, unable to process the emotions swirling through her. Rebecca, misinterpreting the situation, said quickly, "We will take the mare. Please have the arrangements made with Judge Thornton's account. Come along, Sarah. We have much more to do today." Sarah allowed herself to be led away, her thoughts in chaos. Behind her, she heard Mr. Fletcher say something to Cole in a low voice, but she could not make out the words. Her hand trembled as she kept it pressed near her mouth, and Rebecca, noticing her distress, said kindly, "Are you feeling unwell, dear? Perhaps the heat is too much. Let us go home, and you can rest this afternoon." Sarah nodded mutely, grateful for the excuse, but it was not the heat that had unsettled her. It was the genuine warmth in Cole's voice when he had said those impossible words. It was the fact that he had looked directly at her crooked smile and called it beautiful. It was the terrifying possibility that he had actually meant it. That afternoon, lying on her narrow bed with a cool cloth on her forehead that Rebecca had insisted she use, Sarah tried to make sense of what had happened. She had spent 22 years believing that her crooked teeth made her unworthy of admiration, undeserving of the kind of romantic attention that other women receive naturally. Her mother had reinforced this belief at every opportunity, treating Sarah's imperfection as a shameful family secret to be hidden and minimized. But Cole had looked at her smile and called it beautiful. He had not looked away in embarrassment or polite pretense. He had smiled back at her with what seemed like genuine appreciation. Sarah did not know what to do with this information. It contradicted everything she had been taught about herself. She touched her fingers to her teeth, feeling the familiar irregular surfaces, the way they overlapped and grew at slight angles. They were the same teeth they had always been. Nothing about them had changed, but perhaps something about how she was seen in this new place could be different. Perhaps in Prescott, Arizona territory, far from her mother's influence and the rigid social hierarchies of Philadelphia, she could be something other than the girl who must never smile. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next week, Sarah settled into a routine in Prescott. She spent her mornings preparing lessons for the school term, reviewing the primers and textbooks that had been ordered from Denver, and making lists of supplies she would need. In the afternoons, she helped Rebecca with household tasks or explored the town on her own, gradually becoming more familiar with its layout and rhythms. She saw Cole Fletcher several times during that week, always from a distance. Once, when she was walking to the general store, she saw him riding down Montezuma Street on a handsome gray gelding, sitting his saddle with the easy grace of someone born to horses. Another time, she glimpsed him through the window of the feed store, deep in conversation with an older rancher. Each time, her heart beat a little faster, and she found herself both hoping and fearing that he would notice her. On Sunday, she attended services at the church with Rebecca and Thomas. The little wooden building was packed with townspeople dressed in their best clothes, and Reverend Matthews delivered an earnest sermon about brotherly love and Christian charity. Sarah sat between Rebecca and an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Abernathy and proceeded to whisper a running commentary about every person in the congregation. It was through Mrs. Abernathy's whispered remarks that Sarah learned more about Cole. "That is Cole Fletcher, the youngest son of Henry Fletcher who owns the livery," the old woman murmured, nodding toward a pew near the front, where Cole sat beside his father and an older woman who must be his mother. "Good family, hard-working people. Henry came out here right after the war and built up that business from nothing. Cole grew up with horses, can do things with them most men would not even attempt. He has a real gift, that boy does." Sarah tried not to stare at the back of Cole's head, at the way his dark hair curled slightly over his collar, at the breadth of his shoulders in his Sunday coat. She forced her attention back to the Reverend's sermon, but she found her thoughts wandering again and again to the man several pews ahead. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the brilliant Sunday sunshine, Sarah kept close to Rebecca's side, hoping to avoid drawing attention to herself. But Mrs. Abernathy had other ideas. The elderly woman grabbed Sarah's arm with surprising strength and steered her directly toward where the Fletcher family stood, greeting friends. "Henry, Martha, I want you to meet Rebecca Thornton's cousin from Philadelphia," Mrs. Abernathy announced. "This is Miss Sarah Thompson, who will be teaching at the school. Sarah, dear, this is Henry and Martha Fletcher, and their son, Cole." There was no escape. Sarah found herself face to face with Cole, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, close enough to notice the small scar on his chin, and the way his mouth quirked up slightly at one corner. He had shaved carefully for church, and he smelled faintly of bay rum and clean linen. "Miss Thompson," Cole said, removing his hat and inclining his head politely. "It is a pleasure to see you again. I hope Rosie has been treating you well." "I have not had the opportunity to ride her yet," Sarah said softly, keeping her words brief to minimize showing her teeth. "But she seems very gentle." "Would you like to go out on her?" Cole asked, and there was genuine interest in his voice. "I would be happy to ride along with you, show you some of the prettier trails around Prescott. These mountains have some beautiful country once you get up into them." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to retreat into the safety of solitude. But something made her pause. She looked at Cole's open, honest face, at the hopeful expression in his eyes, and remembered how he had called her "smile beautiful." Perhaps, just perhaps, she could be brave enough to accept his invitation. That would be very kind, she heard herself say, and was rewarded by the genuine smile that spread across Cole's face. "How about Tuesday afternoon?" he suggested. "I can have both horses ready around 2 o'clock, and we can ride up toward Thumb Butte. There is a trail that is easy, but gives some real pretty views of the valley." Sarah agreed, and they settled the details while their parents looked on with benign approval. As she walked home with Rebecca afterward, Sarah felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. She had committed herself to spending several hours alone with this man who unsettled her so thoroughly, who looked at her in ways she did not understand, who had seen her crooked smile and somehow found it worthy of compliment. "Cole Fletcher is a good man," Rebecca said thoughtfully as they walked. "A bit quiet, perhaps, but solid and dependable. His father speaks very highly of him. He has had opportunities to work at some of the big ranches south of here, but he stays in Prescott to help his father with the livery business. That shows character." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to say anything that might reveal the turmoil of her emotions. Tuesday arrived with perfect weather, clear and warm, but not oppressively hot. Sarah dressed carefully in her most practical dress, a brown cotton that Rebecca had helped her alter to be more suitable for riding. She braided her hair and wound it into a practical bun at the nape of her neck, then spent several minutes in front of the small mirror in her room, trying to see herself as Cole might see her. She saw the same features she had always seen: hazel eyes that were pretty enough, a straight nose, clear skin that the Arizona sun had already begun to dust with faint freckles despite her best efforts, and her mouth, which she kept firmly closed as she studied her reflection. When she attempted a smile, she saw the familiar crooked arrangement of her teeth and quickly pressed her lips together again. How could Cole have called that beautiful? Perhaps he had poor eyesight. Perhaps he was simply being kind. Perhaps he pitied her. The thought of being pitied was almost worse than being ridiculed. Sarah considered sending a note to cancel the riding excursion, feigning illness or some urgent task. But that would be cowardly, and she had come all the way to Arizona territory, in part to try to become someone braver than the timid girl she had been in Philadelphia. At 2 o'clock, she walked to the livery stable where Cole was waiting with both horses saddled and ready. He smiled when he saw her approaching and helped her mount Rosie with a courtesy that seemed entirely natural to him. The mare stood perfectly still as Sarah settled into the side saddle, and Cole adjusted the stirrup to the proper length with quick, efficient movements. "She is a good, steady mount," Cole said, swinging up onto his gray gelding with easy grace. "Just give her a light touch with your heel when you want her to move, and a gentle pull on the reins when you want her to slow or stop. She will take care of you." They rode through Prescott streets at a walk, drawing occasional glances from townspeople who recognized them. Sarah felt self-conscious about being seen with Cole, worried about what people might think or say. But Cole seemed entirely comfortable, nodding greetings to people they passed and occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering bits of information about the town's history. Once they left the main streets and began following a trail that led up into the pine-covered hills, Sarah felt herself begin to relax. The rhythm of Rosie's gait was soothing, and the views that opened up as they climbed were genuinely breathtaking. Prescott spread out below them, looking almost picturesque in the afternoon light, and beyond, the town stretched the high desert country with its distinctive rock formations and distant mountains. Cole rode slightly ahead, but he frequently looked back to check on Sarah and to point out features of interest. He showed her where a family of hawks nested in the tall pines, where a spring created a small oasis of green vegetation, where the trail forked toward different destinations in the mountains. He spoke easily about the country, clearly loving this landscape with its stark beauty and dramatic vistas. "I grew up exploring these hills," he said, as they paused at a particularly scenic overlook. "My father used to bring me up here when I was a boy, teaching me to read trail signs and understand the land. This country gets in your blood if you give it a chance. It is harsh sometimes, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not." Sarah thought she understood what he meant. There was something refreshing about the directness of this place, the way people said what they meant and meant what they said. It was so different from the elaborate social codes of Philadelphia, where every word and gesture carried layers of hidden meaning. They rode for nearly 2 hours, following trails that wound through forests of pine and oak, across meadows dotted with wildflowers, past massive granite boulders that seemed to have been dropped randomly by some giant hand. Cole proved to be an excellent guide, knowledgeable about every aspect of the country they traversed. He pointed out animal tracks and identified bird calls, showed her edible plants, and warned her about poison oak, told stories about the early prospectors and the Apache warriors who had once controlled this entire region. As Sarah listened to him talk, she found herself increasingly drawn to him. He had an intelligence and sensitivity that she had not expected from a man who worked with horses for a living. He noticed small details, appreciated beauty in unexpected places, and spoke with a poetry that seemed entirely unconscious. More than that, he treated her with a respect that did not feel condescending. He did not talk down to her or assume she was fragile because she was a woman from the East. He simply shared the things he loved about this country and seemed genuinely interested in her reactions. As the afternoon wore on and Sarah became more comfortable in Cole's presence, she forgot to guard her expressions as carefully as usual. She laughed aloud when his gelding shied at a pine cone, and smiled with genuine delight when he showed her a family of quail scurrying across the trail. It was only when she caught Cole watching her with an expression of warm appreciation that she remembered her crooked teeth and quickly covered her mouth with her hand. Cole reined his horse to a stop and looked at her seriously. "Why do you do that?" he asked gently. Sarah's face flushed hot. "Do what?" she asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. "Cover your mouth when you smile. Hide your face like you have done something wrong." Sarah looked away, unable to meet his eyes. The truth stuck in her throat, painful and embarrassing. They had known each other for less than 2 weeks. She had no reason to confide in him, no reason to expose the shame that had defined her entire life. But something about his genuine concern, the kindness in his voice, made her want to explain. "My teeth," she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "They grew in crooked. My mother always told me to keep my mouth closed, to not draw attention to them. She said it was unseemly to display such an imperfection." She forced herself to look at him then, expecting to see pity or polite embarrassment. Instead, she saw something that looked like anger flash across his features, quickly controlled. "Your mother told you that?" he said, his voice tight with some emotion she could not quite identify. "That you should hide your smile?" Sarah nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to add weakness to imperfection. Cole dismounted in one smooth motion and came to stand beside Rosie, looking up at Sarah with those remarkable amber eyes. "Miss Thompson, Sarah, may I tell you what I see when you smile?" Sarah shook her head slightly, not wanting to hear polite lies or kind falsehoods. But Cole continued anyway, his voice low and earnest. "I see joy. I see genuine happiness lighting up your whole face. I see someone who deserves to laugh without shame, to express delight without hiding. Your teeth are part of who you are, and there is nothing about you that needs hiding or fixing or apologizing for. When you smiled yesterday at those quail, you were the most beautiful thing in these mountains." The tears Sarah had been holding back spilled over then, running down her cheeks despite her best efforts. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever suggested that she was acceptable exactly as she was. She did not know whether to believe him, whether to trust this stranger who said such impossibly kind things. Cole reached up and very gently took her hand, the one that had flown instinctively to cover her mouth. He held it carefully, as though it were something precious. "I know we have just met," he said quietly. "I know I have no right to speak to you about personal matters, but I cannot stand by and watch you diminish yourself based on some foolish words someone spoke to you long ago. You are beautiful, Sarah Thompson. All of you, including your smile. especially your smile." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the way his rough, work-hardened fingers held hers with such gentleness. She felt something shift inside her, some locked door beginning to open. She was not naive enough to believe that one kind speech could undo 22 years of shame and conditioning, but perhaps it could be a beginning. "Thank you," she whispered, and this time, when she smiled at him, she made a conscious effort not to hide it. Cole's answering smile was radiant. "There," he said softly. "Perfect." They rode back to Prescott as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Sarah felt different somehow, lighter, as though some burden she had carried for so long had been lessened even if not entirely removed. Cole rode beside her now rather than ahead, and they talked more easily, sharing stories about their lives and families. Sarah learned that Cole was 25 years old, that he had 2 older sisters who had married and moved away, that he had once considered trying his luck as a ranch foreman, but had decided his place was helping his father in Prescott. He spoke about his love for horses with genuine passion, explaining how he could read their personalities and work with their natural instincts rather than against them. In turn, Sarah told him about Philadelphia, about her work helping in her father's office before he died, about her love of reading and learning. She spoke carefully about her family, not quite ready to expose all the complicated dynamics that had shaped her, but she found herself being more honest with Cole than she had been with anyone in a long time. By the time they returned to the livery stable, the sun had set and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Cole helped Sarah dismount, his hand steady at her waist, and she felt the warmth of his touch through the fabric of her dress. They stood for a moment in the gathering dusk, neither quite ready for the afternoon to end. "Would you like to ride again?" Cole asked. "Perhaps this Saturday, if you're free." Sarah smiled, and this time she barely hesitated before allowing the full expression to show on her face. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Sarah and Cole fell into a pattern of spending time together. They rode into the mountains on Saturday afternoons, exploring new trails and discovering hidden valleys. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting with their respective families, but always finding time to talk after the service. On Wednesday evenings, Cole would appear at Rebecca's house with some plausible excuse to speak with Judge Thornton, but would somehow end up staying for supper and spending the evening in conversation with Sarah on the front porch. Prescott's residents noticed the growing attachment, and the general consensus seemed to be approval. The Fletchers were respected members of the community, and Cole was known as a hard-working young man with good prospects. Sarah, as the new school teacher, occupied a position of some importance in the town's social hierarchy. The match seemed appropriate to everyone except Sarah herself, who still sometimes could not quite believe that Cole's interest in her was genuine. She had spent so many years believing herself unworthy of romantic attention that it was difficult to accept that this kind, intelligent, attractive man truly wanted to spend time with her. She kept waiting for him to lose interest, to realize that she was not worth the effort, to find someone prettier and more deserving of his affection. But Cole's regard never wavered. If anything, it seemed to deepen as they spent more time together. He listened when she talked about her plans for the school with genuine interest. He asked her opinion about books and current events, treating her thoughts as valuable. He made her laugh with stories about his misadventures with various horses over the years, and he never, ever made her feel that she needed to hide her smile. In late August, the school term began, and Sarah found herself occupied with the demanding work of teaching 23 children, ranging in age from 6 to 14. The schoolhouse was a single room with rough wooden benches, a blackboard that Cole had helped her paint on one wall, and a small desk for the teacher. The students came from various backgrounds, children of miners, ranchers, merchants, and town officials, all mixed together in the democratic chaos of frontier education. Sarah discovered that she loved teaching. She had always enjoyed learning, and sharing that love with her students came naturally to her. She organized the children into groups by ability rather than age, allowing the advanced students to help the younger ones, while she worked with those who needed more individual attention. She brought books from Rebecca's house to supplement the meager school library, and she spent her evenings preparing lessons that would engage her students' imaginations while teaching them necessary skills. Cole often stopped by the schoolhouse in the late afternoon, ostensibly to check on some repair he had made to the building, or to bring supplies his father had ordered for the school. But Sarah knew the real reason was simply to see her, and she found herself watching for his arrival, her heart lifting when she saw him ride up on his gray gelding. The children quickly noticed Cole's frequent visits, and they teased Sarah with the brutal honesty of youth. "Miss Thompson has a beau," they would chant, giggling behind their hands. Sarah would shush them and redirect their attention to their lessons, but she could not quite suppress the smile that came to her face. And that smile, crooked teeth and all, no longer embarrassed her as it once had. One afternoon in mid-September, Cole arrived at the schoolhouse just as Sarah was dismissing the children for the day. He waited patiently while she supervised their departure, making sure the youngest ones were met by parents or older siblings. When the last child had gone, Cole approached with a somewhat nervous expression that Sarah had not seen before. "I have something I want to show you," he said. "It is a surprise. Can you spare an hour?" Sarah agreed, curious about what had Cole looking so uncertain. He helped her mount Rosie, then led the way not into the mountains as she expected, but toward the edge of town where new construction was taking place. Prescott was growing rapidly, and new buildings seemed to spring up every month. Cole stopped in front of a partially constructed house on a gentle rise that overlooked the town and the valley beyond. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her face carefully. Sarah studied the structure. It was small but well designed, with a wide front porch and large windows that would let in plenty of light. The framing was solid, showing the work of skilled craftsmen. The location was beautiful, with views in every direction and enough land for a garden and a small barn. "It is lovely," Sarah said. "Who is building it?" Cole dismounted and came to help her down from Rosie. He kept his hands on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I have been working on it in my spare time for the past 6 months. I bought this land last year, been planning this house for even longer. I always knew I wanted to stay in Prescott, build a life here, but a house is not a home unless there is someone to share it with." Sarah's heart began to beat very fast. She looked at Cole's earnest face, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and suddenly understood what he was trying to say. "Sarah," Cole continued, taking both her hands in his, "I know we have not known each other very long, just a few weeks really, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are everything I never knew I was looking for. You are intelligent and kind and brave. You came all the way across the country to make a new life for yourself. You worked so hard with those children, giving them chances they would never have without you. And your smile, Sarah. Your beautiful, perfect smile lights up my entire world." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but they were tears of joy rather than shame. Cole reached up and gently wiped them away with his thumbs. "I am not a rich man," he said. "I cannot offer you the kind of life you might have had in Philadelphia, but I can promise you that every day for the rest of my life, I will work to make you happy. I will never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are, and I will spend every moment reminding you how beautiful you are, inside and out, until you finally believe it yourself." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band with a small garnet stone set in the center. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said. "My father gave it to me last week, said he knew I would need it soon. Sarah Thompson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah looked at the ring, then at Cole's hopeful, anxious face, then at the house he had been building with his own hands. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, about all the years of shame and hiding, about her mother's constant reminders to conceal her imperfection. And she thought about Cole's repeated insistence that she was beautiful, that her smile was something to be shared rather than hidden, that she was worthy of love exactly as she was. "Yes," she said, and she smiled at him with her whole heart, holding nothing back. "Yes, Cole Fletcher, I will marry you." Cole let out a whoop of joy and lifted her right off her feet, spinning her around in a circle while she laughed and held onto his shoulders. When he set her down, he was grinning so widely that she could not help but laugh again. He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then Cole cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such love that Sarah felt her breath catch. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Sarah nodded, and Cole leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Sarah's first kiss, and it was everything she had never dared to dream it could be. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Sarah Thompson soon-to-be Fletcher," he whispered. "I love you too," Sarah replied, and the words felt like a revelation, like something she had been holding inside without even knowing it. They spent the next hour exploring the house Cole was building, with him explaining his plans for each room and asking for her input on details. Sarah found herself making suggestions for the kitchen layout, imagining curtains in the windows, picturing furniture arrangement in the parlor. For the first time in her life, she was planning a future that felt genuinely hopeful, a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than desperate compromise or resigned acceptance. When they returned to town, the news of their engagement spread quickly. Rebecca was delighted, immediately beginning to plan the wedding and discussing what Sarah would need for her new household. Judge Thornton congratulated Cole with genuine warmth and offered his services to handle any legal matters related to the marriage or property. Henry and Martha Fletcher welcomed Sarah into their family with open arms, with Martha tearfully hugging her and declaring that she had always wanted another daughter. The wedding was set for early November, giving Cole time to finish the house and Sarah time to complete her first term of teaching. The months between September and November passed in a blur of activity. Sarah taught during the days, prepared lessons, and corrected schoolwork in the evenings, and spent every spare moment either with Cole or preparing for their life together. Cole finished the house in late October, working long hours to complete the final details. Sarah helped when she could, painting walls and sewing curtains, arranging the furniture that Cole built or that they purchased from various merchants in town. The house slowly transformed from an empty shell into a real home, filled with small touches that reflected both their personalities. During this time, Sarah experienced something she had never known before: genuine acceptance and belonging. The people of Prescott seemed to genuinely like her, valuing her work as a teacher and welcoming her as a member of the community. She made friends among the other women in town, particularly Harriet Jenkins and several mothers of her students. She participated in church socials and community gatherings, gradually shedding the defensive reserve that had characterized her behavior in Philadelphia. Most importantly, she slowly began to believe what Cole had been telling her all along, that she was worthy of love and happiness exactly as she was. It did not happen all at once. There were still moments when she caught herself covering her mouth when she smiled, when old habits reasserted themselves. But each time, she would remember Cole's words and force herself to relax, to allow her expression to show naturally. Cole was endlessly patient with her internal struggles, never pushing, but always encouraging. He complimented her smile so often that it became a running joke between them. "There is that beautiful smile," he would say every time he saw her, until Sarah would laugh and tell him to stop being ridiculous. But secretly, she treasured every compliment, storing them up against the old voices of shame that still sometimes whispered in her mind. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in November 1878, in the church where they had first seen each other across the crowded pews. The day dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather in the high country. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Rebecca had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs and a modest train. Martha Fletcher had lent her a veil that had been in the family for 2 generations, delicate lace that had yellowed slightly with age, but was still beautiful. As Sarah stood in the small room behind the church, waiting for the ceremony to begin, she looked at herself in the mirror that Rebecca had brought. She saw a bride, nervous but happy, her face glowing with anticipation rather than anxiety. And when she smiled at her reflection, testing the expression one final time, she saw what Cole saw. Not an imperfection to be hidden, but a genuine expression of joy. The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Reverend Matthews spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, about 2 people joining together to face life's challenges and joys. Cole's voice was steady as he made his vows, promising to love and cherish Sarah in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as they both lived. When it was Sarah's turn, she spoke the same words clearly and without hesitation, meaning every syllable with her whole heart. Cole kissed her when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and the congregation applauded warmly. As they walked back down the aisle together, Sarah smiled at the gathered townspeople without once thinking to hide her teeth, and the genuine happiness on her face made several of the older women dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the town hall, with seemingly everyone in Prescott attending. There was food and music, with several local men providing fiddle and guitar music for dancing. Cole proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding Sarah through reels and waltzes with easy confidence. Sarah, who had been taught formal dancing in Philadelphia but had rarely had occasion to use those skills, found herself laughing breathlessly as Cole spun her around the floor. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and advice. The women particularly seemed pleased by the match, with several commenting on what a fine couple they made. Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly gossip from church, grabbed Sarah's hand at one point and said with genuine warmth, "You have found yourself a good man, dear. Cole Fletcher will make you happy, and you have the sweetest smile I have seen in years. Never be ashamed to show it." Sarah blinked back tears at the unexpected kindness and squeezed the old woman's hand in thanks. As the party wound down and the moon rose over the mountains, Cole and Sarah finally left the celebration and rode together to their new home. Cole had prepared everything in advance, lighting lanterns and laying a fire in the fireplace so the house would be warm and welcoming when they arrived. He helped Sarah dismount from Rosie, then lifted her into his arms and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the silly tradition, but enjoying it nonetheless. Inside their home, in the soft glow of lamplight, Cole set Sarah gently on her feet and looked at her with such love that she felt tears threaten again. "Happy, Mrs. Fletcher?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied honestly. That night marked the beginning of their life together, and it was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Cole was gentle and patient, treating her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and valued. They talked late into the night, making plans for their future and simply enjoying being together without the constraints of propriety that had governed their courtship. The early days of their marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Sarah continued teaching, rising early to prepare breakfast before walking to the schoolhouse. Cole worked at the livery stable, often coming home smelling of hay and horses, his clothes dusty from the day's labor. They established routines and learned each other's habits, the small daily intimacies that define a shared life. Sarah discovered that Cole was an early riser who liked his coffee strong and black. Cole learned that Sarah was most alert in the evenings and did her best lesson planning by lamplight after supper. They found comfortable patterns of being together and being apart, respecting each other's need for both companionship and solitude. But more than the practical details of shared living, Sarah discovered the profound comfort of being truly known and accepted by another person. With Cole, she never had to pretend or hide. He had seen her vulnerabilities and her insecurities, and loved her not despite them, but as part of who she was. That unconditional acceptance was a gift beyond measure. As winter settled over Prescott, bringing occasional snow to the high country and cold nights that required extra blankets, Sarah and Cole created a warm refuge in their little house. They spent evenings by the fire, with Sarah correcting schoolwork while Cole carved small wooden toys for the poorer children in town. They read aloud to each other from books Sarah borrowed from various sources, sharing stories and ideas. They entertained guests occasionally, with Rebecca and Thomas or Cole's parents coming for Sunday dinners. Sarah's teaching continued to flourish. Her students made remarkable progress, and parents frequently commented on how much their children were learning. Several of the older boys who had been troublemakers in previous years settled down under Sarah's patient but firm guidance. The school board, meeting in December, commended her work and assured her that her position was secure for as long as she wanted it. In February, Sarah missed her monthly courses and experienced waves of nausea in the mornings. Martha Fletcher, visiting one afternoon, took one look at Sarah's pale face and knowing smile and declared that a grandchild was on the way. Sarah confirmed the pregnancy with the town doctor, and the evening she told Cole that they would be welcoming a baby in early autumn. Cole's reaction was everything Sarah could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy, then immediately became anxious about her health and comfort. For the next several months, he treated her like delicate china, trying to prevent her from doing any work that might be too strenuous. Sarah found his concern endearing, but also somewhat exasperating, and she frequently had to remind him that she was pregnant, not ill. She continued teaching through the spring term, finally leaving her position in late May when the physical demands became too tiring. The school board held a small ceremony honoring her work, and several parents presented her with gifts for the baby. Sarah found herself moved by the genuine affection the community showed her, and she promised that she would return to teaching after the baby was old enough. The summer months passed slowly, as Sarah's body grew large with the child she carried. She spent her days preparing the small room they had set aside as a nursery, sewing tiny gowns and blankets, reading everything she could find about infant care. Cole worked steadily at the livery, but he came home every evening to dote on Sarah, rubbing her swollen feet and listening to her talk about the baby's movements. In mid-September, on a warm afternoon, when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold on the mountainsides, Sarah went into labor. Martha Fletcher and Harriet Jenkins attended her, along with Dr. Morrison, who had delivered half the babies in Prescott. Cole paced anxiously outside the bedroom, stopped from entering by his mother's firm orders that childbirth was women's work. After 8 hours of hard labor, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. When Martha finally allowed Cole to enter the room, he approached the bed with something like awe on his face. Sarah, exhausted but radiant, placed the baby in his arms and watched as her strong, capable husband became instantly and completely besotted with his son. "He is perfect," Cole whispered, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James Henry Fletcher, after both his grandfathers. Little James proved to be a demanding but healthy infant, requiring frequent feeding and constant attention. Sarah found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. The sleepless nights were exhausting, but watching Cole cradle their son and sing to him in a surprisingly good baritone made every difficulty worthwhile. As James grew from infant to toddler, Sarah and Cole's lives revolved around their small family. Cole took over many of the household tasks to allow Sarah time to care for James. Sarah taught their son his letters and numbers almost as soon as he could talk, reading to him for hours and encouraging his natural curiosity. They were partners in every sense, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating the joys together. When James was 2 years old, Sarah returned to teaching part-time, with Martha happy to watch her grandson several days a week. Sarah had missed the intellectual stimulation and the satisfaction of helping her students learn. The school board welcomed her back enthusiastically, and her students, many of whom remembered her from before, were delighted to have Miss Thompson, Mrs. Fletcher now, teaching them again. The years passed in the busy rhythm of family life. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses as much as his father did. When he was 4, Cole began teaching him to ride on a gentle pony, and James took to it naturally, showing the same intuitive understanding of horses that characterized Cole's work. In the spring of 1883, Sarah became pregnant again. This second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and because Martha was there to help with James. In November, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine Martha, with red gold hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn hazel like her mother's. Little Katie proved to have a completely different temperament from her brother. Where James was active and adventurous, Katie was thoughtful and artistic. She loved colors and textures, and as soon as she could hold a pencil, she was drawing everything she saw. Sarah encouraged her daughter's artistic interests, getting her paper and chalk and later watercolors to experiment with. As the children grew, the Fletcher household was full of life and laughter. James and Katie were close despite their different personalities, with James protecting his little sister fiercely and Katie following her big brother everywhere. Cole proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, but also firm when necessary. Sarah watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, seeing new dimensions to the man she had married. Through all these years, Cole never stopped telling Sarah she was beautiful. He said it when she was hugely pregnant and feeling like an ungainly whale. He said it when she was exhausted from a night up with a sick child. He said it when she was covered in flour from baking or dirt from working in her garden. And he especially said it when she smiled, which she did more and more often as the years passed. Sarah never completely forgot the shame she had felt about her crooked teeth in her younger years. But it became less important, overshadowed by all the proof of her worth that surrounded her. She was a beloved wife, a devoted mother, a respected teacher. She had friends who valued her, a community that welcomed her, a life that was rich and meaningful, and she had a husband who looked at her every single day as though she were the most precious thing in his world. In 1886, when James was 8 and Katie was 3, Cole's father, Henry, suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. Cole took over the full management of the livery stable, with Sarah helping to manage the accounts and paperwork. It was a difficult time, watching Henry struggle with his reduced capacity and Martha cope with the demands of caring for her husband. But it also brought the extended family closer together, with everyone pitching in to help where needed. Henry lived for another 2 years, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1888. His funeral was well attended, with many people speaking about his fairness and integrity in business, and his contributions to Prescott's development. Cole inherited the livery stable, and he ran it with the same principles his father had taught him: honest dealing, quality work, and fair prices. Sarah continued teaching, eventually becoming the head teacher at the school, as it expanded to 2 rooms to accommodate Prescott's growing population. She trained younger teachers, developed curriculum, and became known throughout the territory as an innovative educator. Several of her former students went on to attend universities back east, and they often wrote to her about how her teaching had shaped their lives. James showed an early aptitude for business, and by the time he was 15, he was helping his father manage the livery stable's accounts and negotiations with suppliers. Katie's artistic talent continued to develop, and at 13, she was creating paintings that people in Prescott wanted to purchase. Sarah and Cole encouraged both their children's interests, believing that education and hard work could open doors regardless of gender or background. As their children grew toward adulthood, Sarah and Cole's relationship deepened in ways that only time and shared experience can create. They had weathered financial difficulties, family tragedies, the challenges of raising children, and the simple daily frustrations of life. Through it all, they had remained partners and best friends, supporting each other and choosing each other every single day. In the summer of 1892, James fell in love with a young woman named Elizabeth Carter, the daughter of a rancher who supplied horses to the livery stable. Beth was intelligent and capable, with a quick wit and a kind heart. Sarah watched her son court this young woman and saw echoes of how Cole had courted her 15 years earlier, with respect, genuine interest, and unwavering devotion. James and Beth married in October of 1892 in the same church where Sarah and Cole had exchanged their vows. As Sarah watched her son make promises to his bride, she reached over and took Cole's hand, squeezing it gently. He looked at her and smiled, and she smiled back, no longer even thinking about hiding her crooked teeth. After 15 years of marriage, it was simply second nature to express her feelings openly. A year later, James and Beth presented Sarah and Cole with their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Sarah Elizabeth, in honor of both grandmothers. Holding her tiny namesake in her arms, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion and gratitude. She had come so far from the ashamed young woman who had arrived in Prescott, convinced that she was unworthy of love and happiness. Katie, meanwhile, was developing into a talented artist whose work was beginning to attract attention beyond Prescott. At 16, she was offered an apprenticeship with an established painter in Santa Fe who specialized in landscapes of the southwestern territories. It was a difficult decision, but Sarah and Cole ultimately agreed that Katie should have the opportunity to develop her gift. They traveled with her to Santa Fe to meet the artist and ensure that the living arrangements would be appropriate for their young daughter. Saying goodbye to Katie at the stagecoach station was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done, but she understood that her daughter needed to pursue her own dreams, just as Sarah had pursued hers when she left Philadelphia all those years ago. Cole held Sarah as they watched the coach carry Katie away, and they comforted each other with the knowledge that they had raised their daughter to be independent and capable. With both children launched into their adult lives, Sarah and Cole entered a new phase of their marriage. They had more time for each other, for long rides into the mountains they both loved, for quiet evenings reading together, for traveling to visit Katie in Santa Fe, or to help James and Beth with their growing family. The livery stable continued to prosper under Cole's management, and Sarah kept teaching, finding fulfillment in helping each new generation of students. In 1895, Arizona Territory celebrated its silver anniversary, marking 25 years since its establishment. Prescott held a large celebration with speeches and parades and historical exhibits. Sarah and Cole attended the festivities with their grandchildren, and Sarah was asked to speak about her experiences as one of Prescott's early teachers. Standing before the crowd, she talked about the changes she had witnessed, the growth of the community, the students she had taught who had gone on to build lives throughout the territory and beyond. At the end of her speech, Sarah spoke more personally. "When I arrived in Prescott 17 years ago," she said, "I was a young woman full of insecurities and doubts. I had been taught to hide my true self, to believe that I was somehow less than others. But this community, and especially one particular cowboy who told me to smile more, taught me that I was worthy exactly as I was. Prescott gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and a life beyond my wildest dreams. For that, I will be forever grateful." The crowd applauded warmly, and when Sarah stepped down from the platform, Cole was there to embrace her. "Still the most beautiful smile in Arizona territory," he murmured in her ear, making her laugh and swat at him playfully. The late 1890s brought new challenges and changes. Katie returned from Santa Fe after 3 years, having learned everything she could from her mentor. She set up a studio in Prescott and began accepting commissions, quickly establishing herself as the territory's premier landscape artist. Her paintings captured the stark beauty of the Arizona high country in ways that resonated with people who loved the land. James and Beth had 3 more children, giving Sarah and Cole a house full of grandchildren to spoil and enjoy. The livery stable expanded to include a small ranch where Cole raised and trained horses, employing several men and becoming one of the larger businesses in Prescott. Sarah finally retired from teaching in 1898, after 20 years in the classroom, leaving behind a legacy of hundreds of students she had influenced. Retirement gave Sarah time to pursue interests she had long neglected. She joined a ladies' literary society, started a lending library in her home, and wrote articles about education that were published in territorial newspapers. She also spent more time with Cole, accompanying him on buying trips to ranches throughout the territory and enjoying the freedom to travel that their earlier years, consumed by child-rearing and work, had not allowed. On their 20th wedding anniversary in November 1898, Cole surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco. It was the farthest Sarah had traveled since leaving Philadelphia 2 decades earlier, and she was both excited and nervous about seeing a real city again. They stayed in a hotel with running water and electric lights, marvels of modern technology that Arizona territory was only beginning to adopt. They attended the theater, ate in fancy restaurants, and walked along the waterfront watching ships from all over the world. One evening, as they strolled through Golden Gate Park in the mild California autumn, Cole stopped and turned to face Sarah. They were older now, both in their 40s, with silver beginning to thread through their hair and lines forming at the corners of their eyes. But the love between them was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, perhaps stronger for having been tested and proven through years of partnership. "Do you remember," Cole said, "the first time I saw you smile? Really smile, not that careful half expression you used to hide behind?" Sarah thought back to that day at the corral, when she had been new to Prescott and so full of shame. "I remember," she said softly. "I knew right then," Cole continued, "that I wanted to spend the rest of my life making you smile like that. Freely, joyfully, without reservation. Have I succeeded?" Sarah looked at her husband, this good man who had loved her so well for so long, and she smiled with her whole heart. "You have exceeded every hope I ever had," she said. "You taught me to see myself differently, to believe I was worthy of love and happiness. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." Cole pulled her close and kissed her tenderly, there in the park with strangers passing by and the sun setting over the Pacific Ocean. "You were always worthy," he said when they finally broke apart. "I just helped you see what was always true." They returned to Prescott renewed and refreshed, ready for whatever the future might bring. The new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges they could not yet imagine. But Sarah faced the future with confidence, secure in the love of her family and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. As the 20th century dawned, Prescott continued to grow and modernize. Electricity came to the town, along with telephone lines and improved rail connections. The rough frontier outpost Sarah had first encountered in 1878 was becoming a proper city, with paved streets and brick buildings and cultural amenities. Some longtime residents lamented the changes, mourning the loss of the old days. But Sarah, who had witnessed and contributed to Prescott's transformation, saw the progress as a sign of health and vitality. Katie married in 1901, choosing a fellow artist she had met during her time in Santa Fe. Her husband, Michael O'Brien, was of Irish descent, a sculptor whose work complemented Katie's paintings beautifully. They built a home on the outskirts of Prescott with studio space for both of them, and they created art that celebrated the Southwest's unique character. Katie's marriage was different from Sarah's, two artists supporting each other's creative visions, but it was equally loving and partnership-based. James took over full ownership of the livery stable and ranch when Cole decided to semi-retire in 1903. Cole was 50 years old and ready to slow down, though he still worked with the horses he loved and consulted on difficult training cases. He spent more time with Sarah, and they became a familiar sight riding together through the mountains, two middle-aged people still clearly in love after 25 years of marriage. The grandchildren grew, and Sarah delighted in teaching them to read and encouraging their various interests. She told them stories about the old days of Prescott, about Indians and miners, and the wild early years of the territory. She showed them how to identify plants and track animals, skills Cole had taught her decades earlier, and she always encouraged them to be themselves fully and without apology, to never hide their true natures out of shame or fear. In 1908, on a beautiful October afternoon, when the aspens were brilliant gold against blue sky, Sarah and Cole celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the house Cole had built so long ago, the house that had sheltered 3 decades of love and laughter and life. James had arranged for a photographer to come, new technology that could capture images on film, and the whole family posed together in front of the house. Sarah stood beside Cole in that photograph, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and she smiled without reservation. The image captured a moment of pure happiness, a family built on love and respect and mutual support. When Sarah saw the finished photograph weeks later, she marveled at how content she looked, how completely her expression showed her joy. That woman in the photograph bore little resemblance to the anxious, self-conscious girl who had arrived in Prescott 30 years earlier. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable mixture of joys and sorrows that comprise a full life. Martha Fletcher passed away in 1910, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76. Cole grieved deeply for his mother, but he found comfort in Sarah's steady support and in the knowledge that Martha had lived a good long life surrounded by people who loved her. Sarah's own mother died in 1912, and the news came in a letter from Sarah's sister in Philadelphia. Sarah felt complicated emotions at her mother's passing, sadness for the relationship they never quite had, relief that she no longer needed to seek approval that would never come, and a deep gratitude that she had built a life so different from the one her mother had envisioned for her. Cole held her while she worked through her feelings, and eventually Sarah found peace with her mother's memory. As Sarah and Cole moved through their 50s and into their 60s, they mellowed together like fine wine aging in a barrel. They knew each other's rhythms and moods so completely that words were often unnecessary. They had developed private jokes and shared references that made their children roll their eyes and smile. They had created a partnership that was as much about friendship and companionship as it was about romance, though the romantic element never entirely faded. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, at the end of the Great War that had touched even Arizona, Sarah and Cole hosted a large celebration. They invited everyone they had known over the decades in Prescott, former students, business associates, friends, and neighbors. The party filled their house and spilled out into the yard, with multiple generations mixing and sharing stories. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had departed and only family remained, James proposed a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who showed me what a true partnership looks like, who taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day, who built a life together based on respect and kindness and unwavering support. May we all be as lucky as they have been." Everyone drank to the toast, and Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. She looked at Cole and found him watching her with that same expression of love and appreciation she had seen countless times over the years. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it in every possible sense. "For what?" Cole asked, though she suspected he knew. "For seeing me," Sarah said. "For loving me. For telling me to smile more when I most needed to hear it." Cole took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Best decision I ever made," he said. telling that beautiful woman to share her smile with the world. As they grew older still, moving into their 70s, Sarah and Cole's life became quieter but no less full. They spent their days in comfortable routines, breakfast together, time in the garden, afternoon rides when the weather permitted, evenings reading or entertaining grandchildren. They attended church on Sundays and community events regularly, remaining active members of Prescott's social fabric. Cole's hair turned completely white, and his movements slowed with arthritis in his knees and hands. But his amber eyes remained as sharp and warm as ever, and his love for Sarah never dimmed. He still told her daily that she was beautiful, and she still smiled every time, amused by his persistence even as she treasured his constancy. Sarah's own body showed the marks of age, silver hair, deepening lines, hands that occasionally trembled, but she felt more comfortable in her skin at 70 than she ever had at 20. She had lived a full, meaningful life. She had touched hundreds of lives through her teaching. She had raised 2 good children, who were now raising their own children with similar values. And she had experienced a love story that most people only dreamed about. In the spring of 1928, 50 years after Sarah had first arrived in Prescott, the town held a jubilee celebrating its diamond anniversary. Sarah and Cole attended the festivities, now among the oldest residents who remembered Prescott's earliest days. They were asked to sit on the stage during the ceremony, honored as pioneers who had helped build the community. The current mayor spoke about how Prescott had grown from a rough frontier outpost to a thriving modern city. He thanked the early settlers who had brought civilization and culture to the territory, and he specifically mentioned Sarah's decades of teaching and Cole's business that had employed so many people over the years. Afterward, several younger people approached Sarah and Cole with questions about the old days. They wanted to hear first-hand accounts of what Prescott had been like in the 1870s and 1880s, before electricity and automobiles and all the modern conveniences. Sarah and Cole told stories about dirt streets and oil lamps, about Apache threats and mining booms, about the slow but steady growth of a community in challenging circumstances. One young woman, a reporter for the local newspaper, asked Sarah what advice she would give to young people today. Sarah thought for a moment, then said, "Do not let fear or shame keep you from living fully. Do not hide who you truly are because someone told you that you were not good enough. Find people who see your worth and cherish them, and smile freely. Life is too short to spend it concealing your joy." The reporter wrote down Sarah's words, and they appeared in the newspaper the next day under a headline that read, "Pioneer Teacher Shares Wisdom from 50 Years in Prescott." Several people commented to Sarah about the article, saying her words had resonated with them. Sarah was pleased that even in her 70s, she could still influence and encourage others. As Sarah and Cole moved through their mid-70s, they began to slow down more noticeably. Cole's arthritis worsened, making it difficult for him to ride as often as he once had. Sarah's eyesight diminished, making reading more challenging and frustrating. They relied more on their children and grandchildren for help with daily tasks, though they maintained their independence as much as possible. But through all the physical challenges of aging, their love remained constant. They still held hands when they walked. They still shared morning coffee and evening conversations. They still looked at each other with affection and appreciation, grateful for every day they had together. In the autumn of 1930, Cole suffered a heart attack while working in the barn at the ranch. He survived, but the episode left him weakened and aware of his mortality. The doctor ordered rest and limited activity, advice that chafed at Cole's active nature, but which he reluctantly accepted. Sarah nursed him through his recovery, just as he had supported her through various illnesses over the years. Their roles had shifted from time to time, with each caring for the other as needed, but the underlying partnership remained unchanged. During Cole's convalescence, they spent long hours talking about their life together, reminiscing about the decades they had shared. They laughed about early misunderstandings and challenges. They remembered their children's childhood antics and teenage rebellions. They spoke about friends who had passed on and changes they had witnessed. And they expressed gratitude for the extraordinary gift of having found each other and built such a rich life together. "I would do it all again," Cole said one afternoon, as they sat together on their porch, watching autumn leaves drift down from the trees. "Every single moment, even the hard parts, as long as it meant I got to spend my life with you." "So would I," Sarah agreed softly. You gave me something I never thought I could have, a sense of belonging, of being loved exactly as I am. That was a gift beyond price." Cole squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me the same gift," he said. "The chance to love someone completely, to build a family, to create something meaningful. I was just a cowboy working in my father's livery stable. You made me want to be more, to build something lasting." They sat in companionable silence, holding hands and watching the day fade into evening, content in their shared history and enduring love. Cole recovered enough to resume light activities, though he never regained his full strength. He continued to consult on horse training issues and to spend time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them about horses and the land. Sarah continued her own activities as her health permitted, maintaining correspondence with former students scattered across the country, and enjoying visits from family and friends. Their 75th birthdays came and went, significant milestones that were celebrated by the whole extended family. By this time, they had 7 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, with more expected. The family gatherings were large and boisterous, filled with multiple generations enjoying each other's company. Sarah and Cole presided over these occasions with pleasure, delighted by the family they had created and the legacy they would leave. In the spring of 1933, Sarah and Cole quietly celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary. They did not have a large party this time. Instead, they spent the day alone together, riding in a buggy up to the mountain overlook, where Cole had first proposed. They were too old now for horseback riding, but the views were just as beautiful as they had been all those years ago. 55 years, Sarah marveled, looking out over Prescott and the valley beyond. More than half a century together. Can you believe it? "Every moment with you has been a gift," Cole said simply. "I meant what I said the day I proposed. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, and they sat together in peaceful contentment, watching the play of light and shadow across the landscape they both loved. They had been young together and were now old together, but the essential connection between them had never wavered. That evening, back at their house, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about the frightened, ashamed young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1878, convinced that she was unworthy of love because of her crooked teeth. She thought about Cole's simple, profound insistence that her smile was beautiful, that she should share it freely. And she thought about how that single act of seeing her worth, of affirming her value, had changed the entire trajectory of her life. Love, Sarah had learned, was not about being perfect. It was about being seen, truly seen and accepted. It was about choosing each other every day, through good times and hard times, through youth and age, through all the challenges and joys that life brought. It was about partnership and respect and genuine caring. And it was about the small daily acts of kindness that built, over time, into a lifetime of devotion. As the years continued to pass, both Sarah and Cole's health gradually declined in the natural way of aging. They experienced the aches and limitations that came with being in their late 70s and early 80s, but they faced these challenges together, supporting each other and finding joy in small pleasures, a beautiful sunset, a visit from great-grandchildren, a shared memory that made them both laugh. In the winter of 1936, Cole caught pneumonia during a particularly harsh cold snap. Despite the best efforts of doctors who now had access to treatments unavailable in earlier decades, his weakened heart could not withstand the additional strain. He died peacefully in his sleep on a February night, with Sarah holding his hand. Sarah's grief was profound but not bitter. She had had 58 years with Cole, far more than many people ever got with their beloved partners. They had built a life together that was rich and meaningful, and they had loved each other truly and deeply until the very end. At Cole's funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Prescott, Sarah spoke about her husband with warmth and gratitude, celebrating his life rather than simply mourning his death. "Cole Fletcher was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice steady despite her sorrow. "He had a gift for seeing the best in people, for bringing out the potential in both horses and humans. He loved this land and this community, and he contributed to it in countless ways, large and small. But most of all, he was a man who knew how to love, fully, generously, without reservation. I was privileged to be the recipient of that love for 58 years, and I will carry it with me for whatever time I have remaining." After Cole's death, Sarah moved in with James and Beth. She was 80 years old now, and while still mentally sharp, she could no longer manage the physical demands of living alone. James and Beth welcomed her warmly, giving her a comfortable room in their home and including her in all their family activities. Sarah appreciated their kindness, though she missed Cole desperately. The months after Cole's passing were difficult for Sarah. She had spent nearly 60 years as part of a partnership, and learning to be alone again was challenging, but she found comfort in her family, in her memories, and in the knowledge that she had been truly loved. She spent her time reading when her eyes permitted, working on needlework projects for her great-grandchildren, and sharing stories about Cole with anyone who wanted to hear them. On what would have been their 59th wedding anniversary in November 1937, Sarah asked James to take her up to the mountain overlook one more time. It was a beautiful autumn day, mild and clear, with the aspens turned to gold and the sky an impossible blue. Sarah sat in the buggy and looked out over the view she and Cole had shared so many times, and she felt his presence strongly. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to Cole's memory, to whatever force had brought them together all those years ago. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me such a beautiful life." Sarah lived for 2 more years after Cole's death, remaining mentally alert and engaged with her family until the end. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in January 1940, just a few months after her 83rd birthday. Her funeral was well attended, with former students, now middle-aged with children of their own, coming to pay their respects to the teacher who had influenced their lives so profoundly. Katie spoke at the funeral about her mother's courage in coming to Arizona alone, her dedication to teaching, and most of all, her capacity for love. "My parents had one of the great love stories," Katie said, tears streaming down her face. "They showed all of us what marriage could be when it was based on respect and genuine caring. And my mother taught us all, through her example, that we should never be ashamed of who we are, that we should always live authentically and love freely." Sarah was buried beside Cole in Prescott's Citizen Cemetery, under the pines they had both loved, with a simple headstone that read, "Sarah Mae Fletcher, 1856 to 1940, beloved wife, mother, teacher. She smiled freely and loved well." The legacy Sarah and Cole left behind extended far beyond their immediate family. Their descendants went on to build lives throughout Arizona and beyond, carrying with them the values of hard work, integrity, and unconditional love that Sarah and Cole had modeled. Sarah's former students remembered her teaching and her encouragement, and many of them became teachers themselves, passing on her educational philosophy to new generations. And the story of the cowboy who told the self-conscious young woman to smile more became part of Prescott's local lore, a reminder that kindness and acceptance can transform lives. In the years after Sarah's death, when family gathered for holidays or special occasions, they often shared stories about Sarah and Cole. They told about Cole's patience with horses and his unwavering devotion to Sarah. They remembered Sarah's intelligence and determination, her refusal to let shame define her, her eventual transformation into a woman who smiled freely and lived fully, and they spoke about the love between them, a love that had lasted more than half a century and had created ripples that continued to spread long after both of them were gone. The house Cole had built in 1878 stood for many decades, eventually becoming a home for James and Beth's grandson and his family. It was lovingly maintained, with the original structure preserved even as modern amenities were added. The family who lived there knew its history and treasured it as a tangible connection to Sarah and Cole's remarkable story. And sometimes, on quiet autumn evenings, when the light slanted golden across the mountains, if you were standing on that porch and listening carefully, you could almost hear echoes of laughter, the sound of 2 people who had loved each other truly and deeply, who had built a life together based on acceptance and genuine caring, who had proved that sometimes all it takes to change someone's life is seeing their worth and telling them to share their joy with the world. Sarah and Cole's story became a testament to the transformative power of love and acceptance. It showed that what society deems imperfect is often simply unique, that shame thrives in silence but withers in the light of genuine affection, and that one person's willingness to see beyond surface appearances can unlock another person's full potential. Their life together demonstrated that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about seeing someone completely and choosing to love them, all of them, without reservation. In the end, Sarah's crooked smile, the feature she had been taught to hide and had spent so many years being ashamed of, had become the doorway through which Cole's love entered her life. It was the very thing that had made her vulnerable, that had revealed her insecurity, that had given Cole the opportunity to speak words that changed everything. Without that imperfection, without her shame and his compassion, they might never have connected so deeply. The flaw she had believed made her unlovable had actually become the foundation of the greatest love she would ever know. And so, their story remained, passed down through generations, a reminder that we are all worthy of love exactly as we are, that kindness matters more than we know, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply smile freely and let ourselves be seen.